Good morning. Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Fellowship Convention. Happy Sunday, or whichever day you're watching. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. I'm Shannon and I'm a member of the innovation team here at the Fantasy Fellowship. In this session today, we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by the amazing and totally too modest Danielle Lauren, the debut writer and self-published author of The Spirit Child, which I have in the background here. Hopefully you have seen the covers flying around on our Instagram so far. So Dani today is actually going to take us through the workshop, which is titled One Author's Guide to Self-Publishing. Good morning and welcome to Dani.
Morning.
Okay, so just a few housekeeping things then for this session. As this is an author workshop, you will have the opportunity to drop any questions into the Q&A section and also the chat channel. Use whichever one of those is available to you. As Dani goes through this session, please do submit some questions and we should try and tackle those throughout. Hopefully you have a cup of tea, as is Dani's brand almost, and enjoy. So we have just shy of 30 minutes, so we'll jump straight in. And of course, Dani, let's begin with what made you go into self-publishing your work?
Well, self-publishing was never my original plan. I always intended to publish traditionally, get an agent and hopefully a traditional publisher. But I found that certainly over the pandemic, the querying trenches, as they're called, like where people try and submit to agents, were becoming very, very closed off. But also because the length of my book is a little bit longer than agents like from a debut. I was finding it a bit challenging to get through that sort of initial gate, if you like. So yeah, I just thought I tried it for a long time, and initially I was, and then I thought, do you know what? I want to get this book out there. I'll just do it myself. I want to move on. I want to write the next one. I want to keep rolling. So I thought, well, I'll sort this one out, and we'll see how it goes.
I mean, you definitely are keeping them rolling. I think Spirit Child was released around April time, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And you announced the other day that Earthchild, the sequel, is nearly there. How are
Yeah.
you doing it so quickly?
Well, there was a little trick to that one. I had Earthchild already drafted when Spirit Child was
Uh,
released, so I only had to do like the edits and getting the cover sorted and like all those little admin bits.
mhm,
Whereas actually, if I've got another one that I'm drafting at the moment, I expect to be drafting that for a few months yet before I get to
mhm.
the editing stage. So yeah, I was a little bit ahead of the curve when I announced it.
Cheating a little bit.
Just a bit.
And started to read through Spirit Child myself and noticed in the acknowledgements that you said that this is 10 years in the making. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's a phase. It seems like a long time, but talk us through, I guess, why now? Why now have you self-published?
Well, I started writing it as I say 10 years ago. And I was working full time back then, and it wasn't a priority, and I hadn't sort of realized that actually this is what I want to do. This is what I want to pursue. Um, so I wrote probably about half of it, and then
Hmm.
life got in the way. We moved house, changed jobs, just stuff happened, and it got shelved for a bit. Um, and then actually in 2019, I wrote something completely different. Um,
Oh,
and I wrote it and I finished it and I sent it to the editor and I was working through it and I was like, do you know what? I'm not sure if this is the one I want to like pursue right now. And I was looking through my old writing files on my computer. I was like, oh yeah, Spirit Child. I started to write this. And I was reading through it going, this one, I love this story. Yeah, I want to finish this. And that's why I then sort of picked it back up. So it wasn't 10 years solid. Um, but yeah, it
hmm.
was definitely one of those that I picked up and put down and came back to a few times.
Brilliant. I think definitely want to get into a bit more of that admin piece and, the time around that, because I imagine that as a self-published author, there's a lot there. But I do want to touch on a question that was actually submitted prior to the session from Louise. So Louise also has started to tackle Spirit Child, and she said, what was the inspiration behind Spirit Child? She notes that in the beginning it felt very Lord of the Rings-esque to her.
Yeah, there's probably a good reason for that. I really I read Lord of the Rings as probably a younger teenager, and then I read the Rift War Saga by Raymond D. Feist, which is another series that's got this world of humans and elves and dwarves all coexisting. And I just really love that traditional fantasy dynamic. And I, at the time, couldn't really find anything else like that. And so, they always say, write the book that you want to read. And I guess that was it. I was frustrated that I couldn't find more of these stories. And so I was like, well, I'll write it then. I'll create my own version of it. So that's,
an absolute
from
labor of love and a passion project for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hop actually to one of the questions that we've had submitted live. Izzy would like to know, can you elaborate on what you meant by finding the querying trenches closed?
So, yeah, when you submit to agents, you will inevitably get some responses back and some that you don't get back. And I think normally people are used to agents asking for either a partial manuscript back or just some sort of back and forth. But I was finding a lot of the agents that would have been really well suited to me and my manuscript were just plain closed for submissions. And some of them were just, I was getting plenty of rejections, as I'm sure a lot of writers find in the first sort of stages of their process. But yeah, probably half of my ideal agents were just plain closed for submissions. So it made it really challenging because the ones that I thought would be a really good fit for me just weren't available. And I was talking to my editor about it, and actually she was finding the same thing. She was just finding that a lot of authors weren't getting through that initial gatekeeper bit. So we talk a lot about gatekeepers in traditional publishing. So I don't know if it was the impact of the pandemic. I can imagine that impacted a lot of the industry. But yeah, so I think I hit it at the wrong point. But, lots of other reasons, but I do think that contributed to it, and it did feel like sort of trying to push a boulder uphill sometimes.
Absolutely. The timing, of course, when you said you picked it back up in 2019, I instantly thought, gosh, straight through the pandemic. But does that close you off then for if you wanted to go traditional published? Could you do that again now?
So ultimately that's my plan. So Spirit Child and Earth Child are obviously Earth Child is a sequel to Spirit Child. So I've done those as an indie author. And my plan is with the one that I'm drafting at the moment, which is completely unrelated, to basically start back at the beginning and query again.
Okay.
Which I'm hoping will be okay. Danielle Lauren is a pen name. It's not my full name, so I can still publish under my full name. And yeah, I'm hoping that I'll be able to sort of say, I have self-published these books. I guess it gives me an example of my work that I could put forward. So we'll see. I'm not 100% sure. I know that some publishing houses do look at indie authors a little bit like, but you've done it on your own now, so why? But I'm going to try it and see what happens.
Smash it. And honestly, having read through it, it's so beautiful. And as an independent published book, it feels so mature, so complete, and so complex as well. So I hope that you don't have any challenges in the future.
Well, thank you.
So let's go back to that talk about the admin side of things then. So as an independent publisher, how does things such as proofreading work?
So a lot of it I'll do myself. So I've always sort of said you can self-publish for free. You can do it all yourself and pay very little and have your book, on Amazon or wherever and have people read it. Or you can outsource all these different parts. So like I have an editor that I send to. This was in the acknowledgements in Spirit Child, a friend of mine. I send a completely different manuscript to him. And even before he'd read it, he said, I would strongly recommend that you get an editor. And I was like, oh, no, because it's another expense. Anyway, I did it. And I'm so incredibly grateful that he pushed me to do it, because having that second pair of eyes, having that second pair of professional eyes, go for it and kind of just steer you a little bit, is so valuable.
Yeah.
And you know, that it just, I think it made such a difference to how I wrote as well.
Hmm.
So you can not have an editor and forego that cost. Likewise, you can outsource your proofreading. There's a online marketplace called Readsy, where you can find all sorts of professionals relating to writing books and publishing books. And you can literally just look for quotes for, you can put up your job, and
Yeah.
look quotes from specific professionals that you're interested in. Um, so you can do that for editors, for cover designers, proofreaders, formatters, like just so many different parts of the process.
Hmm.
The proofreading part of it, for me, to bring it back to the question, I did a lot myself. I read Spirit Child over so many times, but also I did give it to a few other people and said, you know,
Yeah.
beta read it, but also if you see any typos, please tell me. Like,
Hmm.
more people you can get eyes on it, the more likely you are to catch these inconsistencies.
Of course, and if you're reading it so many times yourself, you're going to miss things, you're
Oh
going to skim read
yeah.
pieces. So, yeah, completely see how having that spare set of eyes just brings it out, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You spoke a lot there about, and I mean, I complete have no idea of the world, and I can't imagine anyone would want to see a book published by myself. But for those people that are wanting to go on that journey, hearing you
Mm.
say you can go online and you can find these people, these people, these people, how do you even begin to know what you need?
Yeah, no, that's totally valid. Um, the first thing I did way back, it was 2019, so before I even came back to Spirit Child, is get the Writers and Artists Handbook. It's a, I think it's still a bright red book with yellow type on it, Writers and Artists Yearbook, and they refresh it every year, and it has got everything you could want. There are like little articles in there written by professionals in the industry,
Hmm.
authors, editors, publishers, the lot. But there's also like, there are lists of publishers, of indie publishing services, of
Hmm.
agencies, and just all the sorts of things that you might want. So I had that, and I used that to first start querying and finding agents that would be a good fit for me. But also, you can go to Writers and Artists online, um, and you can sign up for workshops and,
Hmm.
like classes and courses on, again, various parts of the process. And you can submit your manuscript for editing.
Hmm.
So I had a look at that section, and actually, they say these are our editors that we would submit to. And I contacted, I can't remember if I found them all that way, but certainly, the editor that I now have, I actually found by looking at the manuscript submission process through Writers and Artists. And through that, I emailed them all individually. I was like, look, this is my situation. Are you available to edit? What are your rates? You know, I know nothing. Tell me, you know.
Hmm.
And all three of, I think I started with three, and all three of them I got replies from, and yeah, it was just, that's how it started. But I think you've just got to find a encyclopedia, whatever works for you, but some sort of font of knowledge that suits
Yeah.
you. For me, it was that Writers and Artists Yearbook. That's where I started. And then I was able from there to find all the other places to look.
Fantastic recommendation. Hopefully that's noted down for the other budding authors in the group. Got a question here around what kind of editor did you get?
So she does all different editing, actually. So the first manuscript I gave to her, she was like, you know, do you want me to do a developmental, a structural, line edit? You know, what kind do you want me to
Hmm.
do? And I was like, do you know what? Can you just maybe do everything? Because I had, at the time, I was like, I don't really know what I need at this point. So she did pretty much everything. She did a massive developmental edit for me, and sort of, we talked about structural elements as well.
Hmm.
Um, for Spirit Child, I asked the same, because
Hmm.
again, I felt like I had so much, I needed a lot of support, I felt at that point. Um,
Yeah.
and the last one I sent her, essentially, I just asked for a reader's report because I felt
Hmm.
so more comfortable in my style and my structure and how I was constructing the story. So it was a much more simplified overview. But yeah, she'll do any version of the edits. Probably, I'm trying to think, the most valuable for me to start with was definitely the bigger picture stuff, so the developmental and the structural edit side of it.
Fantastic. And I suppose as a journey as an author, it's getting you over that hill of imposter syndrome, and you're doing the right thing, and then
Yeah,
after that you're like, I've got this.
yeah. I think it's you definitely, I mean, I guess it depends. There are, I'm sure, some natural born authors out there who just fall into it and write beautiful prose from the get-go. I definitely needed, I think it was learning how to be probably a bit self-critical as well, like being able to look at books that I enjoyed and prose that I really loved, and being able to see what made that so good and what made me love it so much, and be able to think, oh, okay, I need to stop doing this, and this, and maybe think about doing that, and that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to go back to the absolute, well, hold it up again so people can see if they've not already, the gorgeous cover. So how do you find an illustrator then?
So that was a Reedsy find as well. So I found my editor through the writers and artists route. Reedsy was where I found my illustrator, and actually I asked for quotes from probably a handful of designers, and the one that I really wanted to work with was the last one to get back to me. So like I had all these quotes, and I was like, but I'm just waiting for this one because I really like her work and her examples.
Yeah.
But yeah, when she did finally come back to me, I was like, yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, set up, and she's been absolutely brilliant. We've worked together on these two different covers now. And yeah, it's been a joy. So I guess the beauty of it is you can ask a few different people and just work out which one's going to work for you.
Yeah, definitely. So and thinking about what works for you, and you're a reader yourself and you love a good hardback, right?
I,
A lot of the independently published books are paperback. So what made you go hardback, and what's the process for choosing things such as the binding, like the colors, or again, hardback?
so I'm a stickler for like how I perceive things should be. So for me, a hardback book is traditionally the first thing you get, right? You traditionally will get a hardback first. And so in my head, that was what I would do first. It is not necessarily the most cost-effective way to do it, but that's what I chose. And in terms of things like the binding, so I know a lot of indie published books have the like printed on the cover finish on the hardcover underneath, and I was absolutely adamant that I was going to have the foil text on the spine, sort of, I guess, traditional look. So I spoke to so many I looked into so many different printing options. So like you can print directly through Kindle distribution. There's Ingram Spark is another option. There's a press called Spiffing Covers, I think, which I believe is UK based, but they also use Ingram Spark. And just I was looking into all these different options, and eventually I found, actually through another local author, indie author actually, that you can independently publish books through Clays and CPI, who are the two major book printers in the UK for traditionally published books. And then they're now set up to support indie presses as well. So I technically count it as an indie or a micro publisher because it's a little bitty. But yeah, so once I contacted them and asked them for quotes, then they were like, okay, fine, you've accepted the quote. Right. What color hardcover do you want? What color end papers do you want? What do you want here? Please submit a spine file for the foil bit on the spine. And this. And, they're like, right, we need all this information from you now to carry on. But it was great.
This leads really nicely actually into a question submitted by Sally. You talked about cost implications and of course having to take some of the cost bearing on. But how about the actual admin and the work-life balance? How do you balance the practice of writing with your day-to-day life?
I I write full time now. Originally, when I started doing it, I was writing in the evenings and at weekends. And when, my husband was very supportive at the start and was like, "I'll put the kids to bed, you get started on
At the
writing."
start.
At the start, it doesn't happen like that anymore. But yeah, it was very much a get home from work, sort the kids out, sit down and see if I can smash out a few hundred words, get the kids to bed, and do the same again. Um, now I do it full time. So my hours are school hours. So, I get up, I take the kids to school, settle down, maybe do some social media, and then I will work until I need to go get the kids, basically. Um, so and then that's it. That's the end of my work day. So like the number of times I've said to my husband that how I would love to be able to work 9 to 5 on this uninterrupted. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, there you go.
it is a juggling act, but
Hmm.
it's fine. It works. I get enough done.
You had a friends moment there. I'm fine. It's fine.
It's fine. It's totally fine.
And where you mentioned there about you do some social media. You do some social media, and Kate asked the question of when self-publishing, what form of publicity do you think works best?
I personally, okay, so I've said this before on my social media. I react to hype massively. So if a book isn't
Mhm.
hyped, I can have it on my shelf, but if it hasn't been hyped for me recently, then I probably won't pick it up. I'm a massive mood reader, so any mood readers among you, like I feel you. It's a real issue. Um, so for me, I wish I had sent out more advanced reader copies with Spirit Child.
Okay.
Um, and it didn't have to be. So I sent out a few hard copies of it because the way that I'm printing, I don't get the advanced copies like you normally see. They are just,
Mhm.
they're printed. So the only copies I have are hardbacks that are on sale.
Oh wow.
Um, and I sent a few of those out to some readers. Sarah was one who read it for me right in the early days. But it doesn't have to be the hard copy. It could be you can send out an e-arc, a PDF version from your formatting
Mhm.
software, that sort of thing. But just getting more people talking about it
Yeah.
is what I think works. And you can do that a lot of different ways. I had another local author contact me and sort of say, "What do you do?" I've looked into these people who review books and all this sort of stuff. And I said, "I'll be honest with you, I haven't paid for any marketing myself. I just sort of sent, I haven't paid for it in terms of I haven't shelled out any money, but I have sent
Yeah.
out free books."
Mhm.
And that's how I would do it. I might do it differently next time. I might learn that that's completely wrong in about a year's time. I don't know. It's all a learning process. But for me, it's definitely getting more people reading it and talking about it. I think is probably,
Yeah.
I think is working.
It's all part of the journey, isn't it? That learning piece, for sure.
Yeah, it is. I'm learning everything
Mhm.
on the go.
And so a question that I had when we briefly spoke previously was you you often see, Penguin Publishers, Faber, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And of course, when I was reading through it, I realised your publishing house, I can't actually see my camera right now, so I can't see if you can see it.
Yeah,
The publishing house is actually referenced in your book.
it
Could you
is.
talk us through that?
Yeah, so when you purchase, the reason I had to do that is when you purchase ISBN numbers, there's, so just a little bit of reference for that, every country has its own ISBN distributor. So Nielsen is the one for the UK. That is the only place you can buy ISBN numbers in the UK. When you buy them, you have to input information about your publisher and your distributor. And I was like, oh, I don't have a publisher name yet. Okay, so sort of I'll come back to that because now I've got to think of a publisher name. And I contacted them and asked them about it, and they were like, "Yeah, no, you do need something, and we recommend that you have like something different to your actual name."
Hmm.
No, that makes sense. Um, so yeah, I was like, well, I kind of want something that's like relevant in Spirit Child, but also something that I can use across different stories, different books, and not have it be like, but that's
Hmm.
the wrong story. And yeah, the tree that's so referencing the story, the tree that the Elven City is built in is an Ochoa tree, and it's one of these types of trees that just, in your typical sort of fantasy way, just keeps growing, and it's massive, and it's like this singular giant in the forest. And I just thought, you know what, that's kind of awesome, because it's where our story starts, and it just it's where the story starts, and just like stories like this, you know, it can keep going and keep growing. So yeah, that's why I thought we'll go
It's
with
a really stunning connection. Really love that. So I could sit and talk for ages around this with you. I do have a last couple of quick questions before we wrap up today. And I'm actually going to fire a question back at you that you submitted for a different author. What are your best what are your best memories of your journey to becoming published?
Ooh. I mean, it might sound super obvious. Oh, actually, there are probably a couple. I'll go for the obvious one first, is when I finally got the hard copies delivered to me. Like, that was like, what was most surreal about it was opening a book, a printed book, and finding my words in it. That was absolutely surreal, because I'd only ever seen them on the computer screen. So that was pretty magical. But also actually having my map illustrated.
Yeah.
The digital illustration. I'll sketch stuff and not show it to anyone because it's rubbish. But yeah, when I got an illustrator to do my map and that came out finished, that was also pretty special.
I can imagine seeing them all sat there on the dining room table.
Yeah,
Surreal.
it is kind of nuts.
And a fan favorite question then. What is the weirdest thing that you have Googled for research?
Ooh, I don't know if I've really done any weird ones necessarily. I've asked a friend who's a really horsey how far it is realistic for a horse to travel in a day. Like, if they were really pushing, how far could they make it? And she was like, well, it depends. What sort of thing? And I'm like, no, this is not a realistic situation. This is a fantasy story. If a horse was pushing, how far could they go? That's probably the weirdest one. But yeah, loads of things. Honestly, the search history is bizarre.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So last question then. How would you describe your work to someone who hasn't read any of it before?
I often say, people say, you know, what sort of thing do you write? So it's fantasy fiction is first, and then when they're like, what does that mean? I go, magic, dragons, and then I often say Lord of the Rings as a sort of reference point, because a lot of people, because it's been so widely covered and adapted and stuff, people are like, oh, okay, yeah. So that's often how I sort of give a reference point for it.
I definitely feel that, and you could have the music in the background as you're reading it, and I definitely think it would fit perfectly.
Oh, fab.
Well, thank you so much, Dani, for giving up your time to answer our question and take us through into some of the insights into the self-publication world. I've certainly learned something, and I hope you guys have as well. You can actually pick up a copy of Spirit Child directly from Dani. Head to her Instagram page, which we will share on our Instagram stories, where you'll find the link to do so. I also believe there are some signed copies, maybe not signed copies, but there are some copies available on the broken binding as well. Thank you all so much for joining and engaging in this session today. We do have some other interviews and workshops on the schedule coming up, and you'll soon be able to go back and have a look at those that you may have missed. Check out the schedule on our website at www.fantasy-fellowship.co.uk/con 2022. Head to our Instagram, head to our Twitter page to find out some more, have a chat through. But thank you so much for your time, and we shall see you in another one. Thank you.
Bye.